states. Numerous such meetings are being held by a range of organizations. And the reason I mention it is because it's really a testimony to the large number of people who have been impacted by Maithili's work. In these difficult times, when all the values Maithili cherished are sought to be eliminated by the toxic politics of those in power, Maithili's life and work provide not just inspiration, but concrete ways in which we can work towards social revolution and for the goal of socialism that Maithili dedicated her life to. Since 1981, when the All India Conference of AIDWA was held, I have had the opportunity of working with Maithili, sometimes very closely on many issues, and it is with that personal experience and learning from her that I speak today. In her 45 or so active years of work in the CPIM, the trade unions, the women's organization and movement, Maithili's work, I believe, was unique because it was a combination of so many talents reflected in the astonishing range of her contributions in multiple spheres and in so many roles that she played. She was a Marxist intellectual. She was a militant trade union leader. She was a leading figure in the women's organization movement, a champion of the oppressed, a fighter against the caste system, an organizer, a friend, a mentor to many. She reached out, and I think this is an important lesson from her life. She reached out to a wide range of people far beyond the organizations she represented. And even while remaining uncompromising in her Marxist ideology and approach, she had that capacity to work with others and build coalitions, taking forward movements for justice. For me, when I look at Maithili's work, she symbolizes the unity between understanding and developing the theory of social change and its direct practice in the specific areas in which she worked. I think this special role of Maithili, both as a theorist and as a direct participant in class struggle and social movements, must be recognized in the history of the party and the left movement, especially here in Tamil Nadu, where her work had a direct impact in shaping party policy in several areas, and at the national level, in her role in developing a Marxist perspective on women's oppression in India. Maithili was, first and in the last instance, a communist. And I would add, a communist woman. I believe that was her core, her anchor. Born into a middle-class upper caste family, she was a brilliant student, earning laurels all through from school to the university in America. Yet, she had to challenge patriarchal norms, which often determine the way a woman is expected to lead her life. She challenged it, and she developed a worldview entirely different from the world she had known. That experience of the special strength required and the struggle for a woman, particularly a woman drawn to a communist goal, a communist party, that experience stayed with her throughout her life. As a leader of the Working Women's Coordination Committee, and then after the formation of the women's organization as a leader of AIDWA, the sensitivity and understanding required to help women overcome barriers and become full-time workers of the Communist Party or a mass or class organization were qualities that Maithili brought to the movement. She was respected and loved by all. We know from all the speeches today and in the earlier meetings too. But she was especially loved by women cadre. So many of them nurtured by her in Tamil Nadu and in India. She raised her voice against patriarchal practices and notions in society. She challenged those cultures. And she also raised the issues facing women cadre and how to enhance their role within the party and within our own movements. I think there's been reference to it, I think, by GR, but I think one of the most agonizing conflicts for a woman communist leader, and certainly it was for Maithili, was also her responsibility as a mother bringing up a baby daughter while continuing her role and not compromising her role as a prominent leader of the party in mass organization. In those days, unlike today, these were not issues which were not much discussed within the party or the movement. It was sort of taken for granted. She was helped enormously by her life partner, Karunakaran, whom I consider a role model in the way he stood by Maithili and enabled her to continue her work. We must all learn from this example and how much it means for women as leaders. Maithili, with all this experience, played a very important role in the preparation of our document. I think it's one of the documents in the entire world communist movement, in which the Communist Party's perspective on women's issues, including organizational issues, was drafted by us in those days. She said to me, after it was finally adopted by the CC, she played a very important role in that document. Brinda, we can be happy that we have finally managed to bring this out. It will outlive us as a guideline and framework for the party, and that is what is important. As we know, her political views were shaped by her experiences in the United States. I'm not going and repeating her entire experience of the anti-imperialist movement, the anti-racist movement. But what I would like to just touch upon is that these experiences were what were the main inputs in her future work that she undertook in India. Because her anti-imperialism was linked to her belief in socialism, inspired, of course, by Cuba, later China. And along with that, her understanding in the belly of the beast, so to speak, in the cradle of bourgeois democracy, of imperialism, of capitalism, and her understanding of democracy in her approach to the Black Power movement in America are all experiences which we saw were her touchstones when she brought those experiences and took it forward in the Indian context and specifically in the Indian women's movement. So she came back to India, searching how best to be involved in the struggle against injustice and equality. And she found her place was with the Red Flag, with the communist and left movement, and as a full-time worker of the CPIM. That was her choice. And she never, ever, even for a minute, stepped back or aside in all the ups and downs that this commitment entailed. I recall in our discussions in the party and in the women's organization, her specific interest, which she brought in on anti-imperialism, and how important it was in the women's movement to develop solidarities, and particularly in the era of neoliberal policies, when women across the world were being most impacted by those policies. And in all our resolutions, our solidarity resolutions, our discussions of what our priorities would be, Maithili's internationalism, her consciousness as a communist about the need and importance of anti-imperialist solidarity was extremely important in bringing that dimension into our work. There were many discussions in those days, in the 80s and 90s, within the party and also within the women's organization on issues concerning the development of a broad-based women's organization and movement. There were so many new challenges, such as the impact of neoliberal policies, the growth of communal forces, the aspect of identity politics, and so on. One of the important issues we were discussing was that of domestic violence, dowry murders, and sexual abuse within the home. What should be the approach of a left-wing women's organization? There was the feminist critique that communist women subsumed gender within class. On the other side, there was a mechanical understanding within our own movement of what constituted class. Some felt that taking up the domestic issues of working class women would be, quote unquote, dividing the class. Maithili was always a very active participant in those debates and helped the shaping of the party and AIDWA's approach and our important role in fighting all aspects of violence against women, including within the home and including within families of our basic classes. So was her role in our understanding in the development of sectoral work, now referred to as intersectional work. In the decade of the 90s, when such discussions were on, Maithili, with her understanding and experience of the differentiations between women, among women, while understanding women as a homogeneous unit on certain issues, there were opinions, including on the issue of violence against Dalit women. And one of the most important surveys was done with Maithili's supervision on the two-glass system right here in Tamil Nadu in 29 villages. Bal Bharti was involved in that. She had taken the responsibility under Maithili's supervision of 29 villages on the two-glass system. I think it was the first such survey done at the time. And I remember in the meeting in one of the villages where some non-Dalit members of our organization had come to question why we were dividing women on a universal issue of violence by highlighting caste violence on Dalit women. And I had the privilege of listening to Maithili's simple but most effective intervention to convince the women and to build that unity, taking into account the specificities of Dalit women's experience. Many of her admirers have described her as a powerful chronicler of her times, and indeed she was. But having worked with Maithili on so many issues and trying to understand and learn from her work, I found from Maithili's work that you first have to have the capacity to listen, to hear, to learn, and to unlearn, to identify with those whose lives you are writing about. That is the difference between the powerful writings of Maithili and other good writers. She fully identified with her protagonist. She was partisan in her class analysis. She was a warrior against exploitation, which she identified unambiguously with capitalism in all its avatars. What a cruel blow that one of the most brilliant minds, a brilliant representative of communist work, of practical work, should be felt by such an ailment leading to memory loss, and for which really at the time, I believe now there are some new medicines being thought of, but at the time there was no cure. Those of us who could visit her on our occasional trips to Chennai, and we met her, and we saw an extension of her sweetness, her smile, her childlike affection. On my last visit, when I went to see Maithili, both Kalpana and Karunakaran warned me that she would not recognize me. But when she held my hand and smiled that sweet smile, a bank of images flashed through my mind, and I thought, Maithili may not recognize us, but Maithili herself will always be recognized as a pioneer a communist, a woman communist, who broke so many barriers and lived not for herself, but for others. I offer my deep condolences to our dear comrade Karunakaran and our dear Kalpana. Maithili, you will always live on in the heart of the struggle for equality and radical social change through your words, your writings, your example. Long live our beloved Maithili Sivaraman. Red salute, dear comrade Maithili.